I'm E.G. Marshall. I've been asked to tell you about the Geneva Conventions and how they relate to you as a medic. The Geneva Conventions were developed by a community of nations to help relieve human suffering. They establish international rules which protect and assist the medic in his task of bringing aid to the sick and wounded. As a soldier, and particularly as a medic, you should understand the conditions of these conventions. The United States has signed a treaty agreeing to the conditions, and they are therefore a part of the law of your country. As an American citizen, you are pledged to abide by them. I think you'll agree that Geneva Conventions deserve your respect and observance. No one understands the horrors of war better than military medical personnel. Unique figures in the makeup of the modern military force, their principal purpose is that of saving lives and reducing pain and suffering wherever possible. The medic's efforts in this regard, in reducing the horrors of war we speak of, coincide with the hopes and concerns of civilized men everywhere. For it is their contribution that sits at the very heart of the humanitarian purpose of the Geneva Conventions of 1949. Reviewing the background and history of these conventions, we find that the first practical attempt to ameliorate the brutality of war in the United States was initiated by President Lincoln in 1863. He commissioned Dr. Francis Lieber to formulate a body of humanitarian rules governing land warfare. This first effort was the famous General Orders 100, the first step in what was to become a universal move to instill a measure of civilized conduct between men and nations engaged in war. Other voices heard at this time were those of Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, whose efforts were responsible for the Hague Conventions, and Henri Dunant, a Swiss businessman who was so moved by what he witnessed at the Battle of Solferino that he devoted the rest of his life to the protection of war victims. He worked tirelessly in this cause, and his efforts resulted in the creation of the International Red Cross and the international agreements known as the Geneva Conventions. The first convention was formulated in 1864. In order to reflect changing world conditions and new methods of warfare, periodic revision of the initial agreement has taken place, resulting in 4 separate conventions. To date, 132 nations have signed and ratified the 4 Geneva Conventions of 1949. Our story deals with the Geneva Conventions and the medic. Under the provisions of the conventions, medics enjoy a special status. In the language of the convention, medical personnel exclusively engaged in the search for or the collection, transport, or treatment of the wounded or sick shall be respected and protected in all circumstances. This applies to permanent personnel and to auxiliary personnel when engaged in medical duties. The sign of the Red Cross on a white field came into being with the formation of the Committee of the International Red Cross in 1863. It has come to symbolize the committee's humanitarian concerns as well as the Geneva Conventions, which it sponsored. In the language of the conventions, the emblem shall be displayed on the flags, brassards, and on all equipment employed in the medical service. Other authorized symbols for medical services include the red crescent and the red lion and sun on a white background. These are used by certain nations who are also signatories to the conventions. Protection is also accorded medical installations, which, like medical personnel, are entitled to display the Red Cross symbol to communicate to combatants that they may not be selected intentionally as the object of attack. This also applies to all forms of medical transport. Medical aircraft are protected in the convention when used exclusively for medical purposes. These aircraft are not to be attacked when flying at heights, times, and on routes specifically agreed upon by the belligerents concerned. All countries that have signed the conventions are obliged to honor the Red Cross symbol. Abuse of the symbol, however, may lead to the loss of the privileged status it provides.
I want around-the-clock surveillance of the area forward of the hill, the woods north of here, and the road leading into the village. I want to report on everything that comes into that area.
Yes, sir. But, this building's being used as a hospital. You sure it's all right to set up here?
Don't worry about that. I'll clear it with the hospital commander.
Lieutenant?
Oh, yes, sir.
Something I can do for you?
Yes, sir. I was just coming to see you. We need to set up an observation post to cover the area just north of here. Well, we'll stay out of your way. I'll see to that.
I'm sorry, Lieutenant, but that's impossible.
But, sir, it's very important. The enemy is getting supplies and ammunition in somehow, and the colonel told me to check it out. I have orders, sir.
Lieutenant, you're in a hospital area. Setting up an observation post here may cost us our protected status under the Geneva Conventions, and I'm not about to let that happen.
Geneva Conventions? But, Major, they don't respect the Geneva Conventions.
Maybe they don't, Lieutenant, but we do. And we can't have an observation post in this hospital area.
Yes, sir.
When the Red Cross symbol has been misused in the manner suggested here, the convention requires that a warning be given and reasonable time allowed to correct the abuse before subjecting the installation to attack. Honoring the symbol at all times ensures the maintenance of a measure of humane conduct in war, one of the basic purposes of the Geneva Conventions.
Geneva Conventions? Huh. Sounds great on paper. But what does it mean out here on the line? Don't do this, do that. Another bunch of rules. Half the time, I don't know what they're talking about.
Principles. Fancy principles that don't mean a thing.
The Geneva Conventions do contain high principles, that is true. In addition, however, they also provide guidelines, practical guidelines that help reduce unnecessary pain, suffering, and death for the victims of battle. The wounded and sick are, perhaps, the Convention's most important concerns. They decree, therefore, that at all times, and particularly after an engagement, parties to the conflict shall, without delay, take all possible measures to search for and collect the wounded and sick, to protect them against pillage and ill treatment, to ensure their adequate care, and to search for the dead and prevent their being despoiled. Parties to the conflict, according to the conventions, may, by mutual agreement, arrange for the removal or exchange of wounded and sick from a besieged or encircled area, and for the passage of medical and religious personnel and equipment on their way to that area. Using this arrangement to better one's military position is a violation of the conventions and is strictly forbidden. The medic is a key figure here, serving as an advisor and the most active participant in the collection and care of the wounded. Consideration and respect for the dead, as well as the wounded of both sides, are deeply ingrained in both the spirit and the letter of the Geneva Conventions. Strict adherence to these principles is always the medic's responsibility.
Over here, Doc. Henderson got hit in the leg.
It's in the soft tissue over the knee. Lucky it wasn't in the joint.
What's that? Oh, some creep over there took one, too.
What's the difference?
You want to call some litter bearers, Sergeant? We're going to have to get this man to a hospital in a hurry.
Don't worry about that guy. Take care of your own first. Take care of Henderson.
Henderson's got a soft tissue wound in the leg. Nothing's going to happen to him if he has to wait for 30 minutes. This man's got a serious back wound. We waste any time and he's going to die.
So he dies. Big deal. I've been over here 2 years trying to kill as many of these guys as I can. So what do I care if he dies?
You do your job, Sergeant, and I'll do mine. Mine is to take care of the sick and wounded. That's what I'm doing.
Okay, William. Anything to get you happy. I'll go get you 2 litter bearers.
The convention is clear on how wounded and sick members of the armed forces should be treated. They shall be respected and protected in all circumstances, and they shall be treated humanely and cared for by the party to the conflict in whose power they may be, without any adverse distinction founded on sex, race, nationality, religion, political opinions, or any other similar criteria. And only urgent medical reasons will authorize priority in the order of treatment to be administered. The right to medical care can never be challenged or revoked. It takes precedence over any conflicting circumstance, even military matters of grave importance.
Sorry, sir. He's losing blood fast. I don't think he can stand being interrogated right now. Maybe in an hour.
I can't wait. I have to talk to him now.
He's not strong enough, sir.
I can't help that. This information's important.
You'll have to talk to Captain Franklin if you want to question this prisoner, sir.
Well, then go get him for me. Wake up, soldier. Wake up. Wake up.
Lieutenant.
Sir.
I'm afraid I can't permit you to question the prisoner at this time. He isn't strong enough.
But, sir, a lot of lives may depend on this information. He's the only prisoner we've got.
I'm sorry, Lieutenant. I'd like to help you out. But if I allowed it, that would be a violation of the Geneva Convention. I'm sorry.
All right. But I'll be back later.
The military urgency of the situation doesn't change the convention's primary concern for the wounded and sick war victims. Neglecting this prisoner's medical condition would constitute a serious breach of the conventions. The medic's responsibilities in this situation are clearly defined. His primary concern here, as in all his medical duties, is the care and protection of his patient. If the interrogation had proceeded over his objection, he would have been obliged to report the violation of the convention to higher authorities. He would have made his report in this manner. Normally, the report is made through the regular chain of command, but depending on circumstances, the soldier may choose instead to make his report through medical channels to a member of the Judge Advocate General's Corps, a provost marshal, an inspector general, or to a chaplain. Civilian detainees are entitled to the same medical care and consideration as is provided for the sick and wounded armed forces. In addition to being a basic regulation of the Geneva Conventions for all contracting parties, it is also good military procedure since it ensures friendly relations with the local population. As with members of the armed forces, civilian detainees shall be treated humanely and cared for by the party to the conflict in whose power they may be, without any adverse distinction founded on sex, race, nationality, religion, political opinions, or any other similar criteria. Any attempts upon their lives or violence to their persons shall be strictly prohibited. In particular, they shall not be murdered or exterminated, subjected to torture or to biological experiments. They shall not willfully be left without medical assistance and care, nor shall conditions exposing them to contagion or infection be created. Wounded prisoners of war are evacuated through medical channels. Army medical regulations and the conventions call for the recording and forwarding of specific information of each wounded, sick, or dead person of adverse party falling into their hands. These records should include surname, first name or names, Army, regimental, personal, or serial number, designation of the power on which he depends, date of birth, any other particulars shown on his identity card or disc, date and place of his capture or death, particulars concerning wounds or illness or cause of death. This information is used for purposes of identification and to ensure adequate medical care for the wounded and sick. While not permitted for any aggressive military purpose, the medic may carry and use small arms for his own protection and for the protection of his patients.
Move. Hey, Skip, over here. Give me dust off. I have one urgent patient.
Dust off 1-6, this is Red Dog 1-8, over. Dust off 1-6, this is Red Dog 1-8, over.
Red Dog 1-8, this is Dust Off 1-6, over.
Dust off 1-6, I have an urgent medevac request. Are you prepared to copy? Over.
Red Dog 1-8, roger. Send your message, over.
Dust off 1-6, request follows. Alpha, Papa, 019er 377. Red Dog 1-8 on 45.7. Urgent. No hoist have Lima, Zulu.
The customary route starts in the first aid station. The wounded soldier is moved next to the clearing station. From there to the hospital, and then, if necessary, to a communications zone TW hospital. The role of the medic in relation to his patient is clearly understood. His own status, however, is sometimes a little more complicated. According to the conventions, medical personnel are assured protection if they are employed exclusively in the search, collection, transport, and treatment of the wounded and sick, and the prevention of disease. Failure to observe these rules may sometimes lead to unfortunate consequences.
You're pulling guard duty just like the rest of the company, Borden, and that's final.
But, Sergeant, I'm not supposed to pull guard duty.
We're short of men.
That'll cost me my protective status under the Geneva Conventions. I'm only supposed to take care of the sick and wounded, medical duties.
I know all about the Geneva Conventions. We got a tough situation here, and I have to hold it together. You're pulling guard.
If that's an order, I guess I'll have to obey it.
First Sergeant, go ahead. Guard mount is 1645? Right. Report to the Sergeant of the Guard at 1645 hours.
Sergeant Borden, I understand you refuse to work in the gravel pit with the other prisoners.
That's right, Captain. I'm not a prisoner of war. I'm a medic, and I'm not obliged to do that kind of work. According to the Geneva Conventions, I am required to perform medical duties only.
Oh, your Geneva Conventions. Oh, here we are.
When captured, the medic, like the chaplain, is considered a retained person, not a prisoner of war. In this status, he is entitled to at least benefit by all the provisions of the Geneva Conventions relative to the treatment of prisoners of war. The convention also states that the medic shall continue to carry out, in accordance with his professional ethics, medical duties on behalf of prisoners of war, preferably those of his own armed forces.
Those are the conditions of the Geneva Convention, Sergeant. No question about it. Sergeant, you were on duty when you were captured, isn't that right?
Well, yes, sir. Well, that is that I was...
You were on guard duty, Sergeant. Isn't that right?
Well, yes, but the convention doesn't forbid my doing guard duty.
Not as long as you guard your hospital compound or your medical installation, Sergeant. But not the perimeter of the airstrip. That's not medical duty. You will report to work tomorrow morning in the gravel pit at 0600 hours.
While the violation may seem small and technical in nature, the consequences may be serious and far-reaching. In this situation, it may mean that many prisoners may lose the valuable medical service that should be available to them at all times. Medical care for war prisoners is the responsibility of the detaining power. The major part of this service, however, is usually provided by captured medical personnel.
Right. What's happened? Yeah, well, looking at you, no one will believe it, but you'll be all right. You'll be all right. You're coming along fine. Okay?
As part of his medical duties, the medic is authorized to visit periodically prisoners of war in labor units or hospitals outside the camp. To care for his patients, the detaining power shall put at his disposal the means of transport required. The medic's position in the prisoner of war camp is somewhat more complicated than that of the regular prisoner of war. For example, he does not have the same obligation as the prisoner of war to make every effort to escape.
Yeah, I don't know. Take a look. No, I'm sorry. I won't be gone. I wish you guys luck, but...
He is allowed to reject the escape attempt, since his escape might result in other prisoners being denied much-needed medical care. In another kind of situation, the medic retains a similar option. Here, the PW camp, because of increased enemy action, is to be moved, leaving the severely wounded behind. The medic may move with the camp to safer ground, or remain with the wounded prisoners who need his knowledge and medical skills. When their medical services are no longer needed, medics who are considered retained persons are repatriated. As a document, the Geneva Conventions of 1949 contain an enormous number of specific rules regarding humanitarian conduct in war. These are some of the key provisions that relate to the Geneva Conventions and the medic. The establishment of a protected status for all medical personnel, installations, and equipment. Honoring the Red Cross symbol at all times. Arranging for the search, collection, and treatment of wounded and sick and dead military personnel. Deciding priority of treatment by severity of wounds only. The priority of medical care over all other contingencies, even in situations of military emergency. The obligation to report all violations of the conventions. Provision for medical care of civilian detainees. The prescribed method for evacuating wounded. The medic's responsibility to protect his patient. His responsibilities for the medical care of prisoners of war when he is captured. And his repatriation when his medical services are no longer required. The Geneva Conventions is the voice of civilized men everywhere in the world. Observance of the Convention's guidelines is, in most instances, a matter of good instinct and simple humanity. But beyond that, it has become a matter of international law. Violation of these humane laws inevitably leads to unnecessary pain and suffering. For those who commit the violations, it may result in severe punishment and even court-martial. Compliance with the Geneva Conventions is the policy of your government, your army, and your medical service. It deserves your cooperation as well.